So we're ready for the landowner portion of the seminar. So Matt and Stan and Nancy, and I'm missing Rylan. Okay, there you are. I hadn't seen you before. So as they're getting seated, I'll just reintroduce the topics that we're going to discuss. The purpose of this is for you to hear directly from landowners what their experiences have been, and they're going to talk about their work with land trusts, their family's considerations, why they put a conservation easement on their property, any doubts they had about that process. I will encourage them to be honest and talk about kind of their emotions and the process that they went through, because it is a process that a lot of landowners consider and they have to work through with different generations of their family. So instead of doing a formal introduction, I think what I'll do is let you guys go through and just introduce yourselves, and if you'll tell where your property's located and just a little bit about, you know, if you purchased it, if it's a family land, kind of what the circumstances were that led to your ownership. And we'll start with you, Matt.
Hi. My property's on the Pedernales, just above Pedernales Falls State Park. And I'd sold the company and had the means to go ahead and buy a property. I was looking for 100, 200 acres, a weekend place for my kids to run around. And at a certain point, I started working with the Nature Conservancy because I'd been a long-time supporter of the TNC and thought that they would be helpful in terms of finding an interesting piece of land. Am I getting too long-winded here?
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
And one day I got a call to take a look at a piece of property, and it sounded great. And when I asked them how big it was, I forgot the exact acreage, but it was about 10 times more acreage than we wanted. Long story short, it turned out to be a very beautiful piece of property, and we were able to buy it, and it just seemed like a natural thing to put it under a conservation easement. I was somewhat familiar with the process, and so that just became part of the whole thought process of acquiring the land and then going ahead and protecting it.
Thanks, Matt.
And I'm Stan Burgess, and in our case, we had property in Blanco County and loved it, thought we were going to build a house. Well, to back up, we're from south of Houston, is where we live. Chemical engineer, worked at Dow Chemical for 20 years, and bought some land up here, and decided we were going to look around for some other property, and found a piece of property on 32. It's about 10 miles from Blanco, going toward San Marcos. And the neighbor that owned the property was interested in conserving property in the area, and we were as well, and ended up buying the property there and worked with the GBRT, Guadalupe Blanco River Trust, in doing our conservation easement.
I'm Nancy Hyde. My family's ranch is in Walker County, now within the city limits of Huntsville. In the 60s, I-45 went in less than a mile away to the east of our property. Highway 30 towards Braun and College Station runs right in front of the property. By the 80s, I was looking at the kind of typically poorly planned, unaesthetic development that was happening around that highway intersection, and I could see what could happen. So anyway, this is compressing a lot. I had no idea what we could do. I thought, well, do we have to give it to the city for a park? People don't treat parks well. How can we keep it the way it is? So in 1999, I got a flyer in the mail for continuing legal education, preserving family lands. There was this guy that I had never heard of, Steve Small, who was teaching this course 4 hours. So I went, and I thought, this could be a way to do it. Now, if only I can bring the family along. So, very long story short, I went to Steve Small and I said, do people do this in Texas? And he said, yeah, call me next week and I'll give you some names. So I made a lot of cold calls to people like Carolyn Vogel, Janice Bezanson, later became acquainted with David Bezanson, some volunteers. Catherine Goodbar came down from Dallas and brought another woman with her to look over our property. We liked these people. They put us in touch with other people that were then with the Natural Area Preservation Association. Got to know David Bezanson and Burgess Jackson, and talked a lot with the family, and particularly with my mother, who had to be comfortable with this, and she wound up giving an easement in her will to the Texas Land Conservancy. Later on, I found out about NRCS programs, the Grassland Reserve Program. As it turns out, we have a rare native grass prairie on our property that I'd never thought about. It had just always been there, but David Bezanson knew what it was when he looked at it. So here we are. Happy to have done it.
Rylan Howard, and I'm from originally from Tom Green County, south of St. Angelo, and grew up on our family ranch south of down there where the headwaters of the South Concho River. We have two sets of springs on the place, big riparian forest for that part of the country. We're sort of a westernmost outpost of certain ecologies. And my grandfather bought the place at the turn of the last century, and he ranched there till he died, and there was a hiatus for about 20 years. He died a little early. And then my mother and stepfather took over the ranch in 1948, and he ran it for 50 years. And my mother was pretty intensely interested in conservation, somewhat controversial, even though people liked her, because of her outlook in West Texas, which wasn't always favorable. We raised sheep, cows, and goats, but we didn't think that hawks were eating our baby lambs. And so I kind of grew up with all of that. And stewardship, we fought some big battles to protect the springs from various forces, including what was then the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, the city of St. Angelo, and various other things. Dairy farms, pig farms. And so far we're doing all right. And in 1969, I started thinking about, my dad was complaining about paying, we didn't have an ag use tax in those days. And so he was always complaining we were paying taxes, you know, for full value, and certainly weren't getting that much back from running a ranch. And I was in law school and started thinking about this, and I said, you know, there ought to be a way to separate the development rights from the underlying ownership of a ranch if you want to continue it that way. And I did some research while I was in law school, wrote a paper on it, and that was 1971. I've been thinking about it all along. Finally did it last year. And we did ours with the Nature Conservancy. I was on the board of the Conservancy for about 10 years back in the 80s, and right now I'm on the board of the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, have been for the last 6 years.
Well, that's a perfect lead into the next part of my questions, which was, what was the process that your family went through? Sounds like Rylan had a very long process to work through. And talk a little bit about the complexities. What were the reservations? What were the family dynamics, if you feel like you can share those? In my own experience, I've seen families have to work through a process. Sometimes it's working with their parents to kind of come to some resolution. Sometimes it's with their children. So talk a little bit about that and what your experience was in trying to get your family members on board, or if you didn't have a problem and it was, talk about, why it wasn't an issue for your family. Who wants to volunteer to go first?
I'll go first because I'm
Okay.
really simple.
Go.
As longtime conservation-minded people, my kids felt the same way. Because it was a recently purchased ranch, it was sort of a no-brainer. Everybody was on board with it. The one thing we did is we drafted the conservation easement. We preserved the right to build 3 additional households. I've got 3 boys, and so conceivably down the road, they might each want to build a house. If they don't, no problem.
So because your kids are younger, I think they're...
Well, the youngest one is just getting ready to graduate from high school. Is that younger?
Yeah, that's younger than adult children. So did you walk them through, did you talk to them about the conservation easement that you were putting on the property and have a discussion about that within your family?
We did. And I think they were largely disinterested.
Yeah.
As long as there was a place for them to run around and have fun, they're not looking terribly far out into the future.
Yeah, they're probably not thinking about the financial implications of when you die and what they're going to inherit. So, Stan, how about you?
Very similar, because as I mentioned, we purchased ours. I went through that same process where it was really my wife and I deciding whether we wanted to do this. My kids are mid-20s, 25 and 28 at this point, and we did this in 2007. So they were basically very similar. They just wanted a place to go have fun, and it was all new to us. We didn't have a place to run around as close. But I did talk to them because, especially, the one word that always stuck in my mind is forever. There's so many things that I always thought back. I thought, being an engineer, I'm real logical and all this wonderful stuff. But then you think, what did I think about that 5 years later I reflected on, and I'm not really thinking exactly like I did then. We all have been through that. And so forever was really a scary thing, especially as you craft the details of what you are going to conserve or what you're going to leave, what you want to make sure you have a little bit of flexibility on. And it sounds similar where we have 2 children. We wanted to reserve the right to split, several hundred acres into two places. But whether that happens or not, same thing. My biggest concern was I'd seen a chart somewhere along the way that showed, I think it was back to the 1700s or whatever of the United States, and it showed the fragmentation over time. Maybe you guys have seen that, but that really made an impact on me. You go to the eastern coast of the U.S. and everything had been fragmented down, and you could just imagine, depending on how many children you had, that's what it probably ended up being. And as it moved west, it was, larger and larger pieces of property. And I felt like, ours is a very small place in the scheme of things, but inside an area that 100 years from now is full of people, halfway, since we're halfway between San Antonio and Austin, that's a very feasible thing to happen. So I felt like that was the least we could do to try to do something now, make it happen, and know that it's kind of a legacy thing, even though it's a small piece we could play. So from the family standpoint, it really wasn't a big issue for us because we were kind of going into this thinking this is what we want to do.
I will mention, I worked with Stan on his conservation easement, and when you talked about Stan about having the ability to subdivide into 2 parcels, one thing that I remembered, which I thought was unique on his transaction, is we targeted the endowment that you gave to the Guadalupe Blanco River Trust based upon there's a second part that kicks in if it is actually subdivided, which is something that I haven't seen every landowner do. So sometimes the endowment is given in one chunk, and in Stan's case we gave it once, and then if a subdivision happens and there's 2 monitoring situations, there would be a second gift that was made at that time. So just totally off topic, but it just was a different technique that we use that landowners might use in their cases. So,
My family land has been in our family for over 100 years. Last year we got our Centennial Ranch designation from the Family Land Heritage Program. So there's a lot of emotional content because it was the place where we went for Thanksgiving and Christmas when I was a kid, many years ago. And succeeding generations have enjoyed coming there to ride horses and go out to the pasture and walk around, do some hunting, and so on. But the thing that I really remembered from what Steve Small said was when you have rapidly appreciating land, particularly, you can't just do nothing. And most of my family had just assumed, oh, well, when mom's gone, she'll just pass the land to us, and it'll be the same as when her parents passed the land to her and her sisters. Well, one of the things that happened was that my mother kept her land, the sister sold it. So the thing that was on my mind was you can't just do nothing. So talking to my siblings about this and trying to convince them that it can't just be the same as it was in generations before. Things are different, and you can see how the city limits have come out. You can see what I-45 looks like. So, and since my family is very politically conservative, I tried to convince them, and which I really believe, that conserving your land is a profoundly conservative thing to do. And to one of the younger members whom I thought might be more interested in money than anything else, but is also kind of interested in status, I said, who do you know that has land that's been in their family 100 years? George W. Bush had to go out and buy Prairie Chapel Ranch, and no disrespect intended at all. And one thing I forgot, it's very important. I got some material when I was trying to educate myself about conservation easements from Carolyn Vogel, and there was a piece in this really nice video about this lawyer who had conserved his own land, Tom Kelsey, who volunteered me for this panel as well. But anyway, he was one of the people that we talked to and gave us some good advice on more than one occasion. So I want to thank Tom for being a part of this process.
thanks. How about you, Rylan?
Well, I'll just segue from that to say that Tom Kelsey was our lawyer, and Tom and I had known each other for a little while. We were moot court partners our freshman year in law school. And interestingly enough, years later, he turned out to be a conservation easement lawyer, and I was doing conservation easement law before I became a trust officer. So thank you, Tom, and I gather you volunteered me as well. So
He did.
these are a source. It's, this, I think I gave you a little bit of the family dynamics, and I think we were sort of operating with a certain level of inertia or trying to, get all this going. And my mother was getting older, and my dad wasn't being terribly helpful. I call him my dad. He's my stepfather all my life. But, and I have great respect for him, but he wasn't a great estate planning person. And so we were trying to put, stuff on different things. I owned part of the ranch, which was helpful. I'm undivided interest. And that was estate planning from 40 years, 50 years ago. But as far as family was concerned, like on my wife's side, She did an overnight conservation easement. She and her brother run a ranch down in South Texas, and so my kids just grew up with all this stuff. Stewardship, wildlife, management, all these different things. So I didn't have to work on them. In fact, my son, Anson, was in law school and as soon as he got to law school, he said, well, let me see this easement we're working on. And I'd been doing it all myself. These are kids, I hadn't really gotten them into details. And he picked up the easement, and he picked up his mother's easement, and he said, Dad, we need to say these things too. And added a great deal, which is what Burgess was talking about, we already had a pretty good description of what was there. Angelo State University's used the place for 50 years as their natural laboratory for their biology department. And so we put all that stuff in there. I mean, we loaded this thing up with stuff. We hope the IRS reads that and doesn't read the rest of it. But it's, having the kids on board. We've got 2 daughters, they're younger. And my middle daughter said, Dad, there's no place to add from the land that's cultivated to add in an organic farm. And I said, well, yeah, we can put it in the cultivated land, but I think that's a good idea because there's a ranch road on the backside of the ranch, and all that was just going to be rangeland, untouched, never changed. So we put that in as a 50-acre somewhere that we could locate an organic farm. So everybody got involved. My son got hugely involved. So as far as the family was concerned, we didn't have anything to really discuss as far as doing it. It was how we did it and get it in there. And that's a huge, for anybody that's a land trust person, being on the board of a land trust, getting those kids in there. I mean, there's been some train wrecks that were no fault of the land trust, not ours, but other ones, where the kids and the parents weren't on the same page. And I don't know how you would have brought those, the kids in on something like that, but ideally you want to have them there so there are no surprises. And when mom and pop are gone, you've got another set of great, positive land stewards.
I will say on the Dahlstrom example, Thomas and I both worked on that, and that we were dealing with, in that case, adult children with an elderly mom who was not in great health, and 2 of the children were in favor of selling a conservation easement and 2 weren't, and that was a particularly difficult transaction because the family was so divided, but they overcame it despite many letters to their lawyers complaining about the transaction. And it all came from a place of fear for them. They were really scared about, what does this mean for the property? Is this really going to work? They didn't really believe they could get $10 million to conserve their property. And it took a long time to get it done too, so that was part of it. But from my own experience in dealing with families, getting the children involved, even if they're adult children, are particularly important in making sure that they kind of understand what's going on and buy into the process. So our next topic, I'm going to combine 2 that I sent to you guys. Have there been any pleasant surprises in conserving your land, and also any disappointments? Is there anything that after you did the deal that you thought, oh wow, I didn't know that was going to be like that or the case? So kind of share your...
I can say that the whole process went very smoothly, and I think a lot of the credit goes to the good advice we got from various people. As I was sitting here thinking, I suddenly realized that I'd left out the best part of the story. The most important part of the story is our ranch had been owned by Charles Mond, the car dealer here in Austin. And when he died, the ranch got flipped to a small-time developer who flipped it to a very large developer. And it was going to be a high-end fly-in golf course community. And all the folks up and down the road were naturally appalled by this. And the way we got involved with the TNC is they were trying to stop this. They wanted to try to do on the Pedernales what had been done on the Blanco in terms of getting a lot of contiguous easements. And so a couple, Pam and Mike Reese, took a lead in this process, and they ended up purchasing half the ranch, and we purchased the other half the ranch. So there was just an expectation going into this that it would get put under a conservation easement. So it was very easy for us to come to that conclusion.
Well, and since that transaction, there's certainly been, you guys, you and your wife, and also the Reeses have led a charge with other landowners along the Pedernales to kind of pull a landowner group together and really protect that area as well. So you're continuing that fight, so.
It's been a great process of getting to know landowners all up and down the river. And so in that respect, it's been a very positive thing as well.
I don't think we really had any big negatives. The only thing that I guess I could bring up is that in our case, we still want 5 years, 6 years later to build there in retirement and move. The golden cheek warbler has been under consideration as to where we can or cannot build, and if you. And I'm not the one to maybe talk a lot about that, other than the fact that it's like you open up the map and it's like the whole hill country looks like it could be that sort of habitat. So there is a few little places that we can go put a house on. So in terms of something to think about prior to, if I had to do it over again, that's probably the only thing. Is it would have been nice to have had some of that delineated up front. So then, because we had to come back and do another survey and where can we not, and so it's kind of like I wanted to make sure I had a place to put a house on it. So that was the only issue that has come up at this point.
And I would say in that transaction, there's kind of a dichotomy that we often face where you want to beef up the environmental features because IRS really looks at that and your baseline to make sure, is there a conservation purpose on this property? So in your transaction, Sam, we documented all the golden cheek warbler habitat. We had a environmental assessment. Your baseline discusses it. There's a map. Look how great this habitat is. And then when you went to, start thinking about putting a place there, we had not designated a building envelope because, I think at the time, I don't really remember, but we didn't know where it was going to go or whatever.
There were several options, and
Yeah.
Until you go out and spend time, anybody that has gone out on their own land, unless they've been there from the time they were kids, you really need to spend time walking on the property to know what makes sense, and those decisions change over time.
I would totally agree with that. How about you, Nancy? Any surprises, disappointments?
So far, so good. One of the things I'm thinking about more and more these days is my nieces and nephews who will come after us when we're all gone. And I've been trying to introduce to 20-somethings the idea that while they may not want to live in Huntsville, they may have ambitions for the Foreign Service or other places to live, that at some point in their lives, we've preserved this for them, and it will be there for them to come to, but they're going to have responsibility for it. And so they need to plan in how they see their lives, their careers developing, how they're going to take responsibility for this. And I have no idea how it's going to happen. I just am trying to plant that seed, but that this is something that is rare, that I really liked what was said earlier about land has values that go along with it, and that's I think very true because of the connection with the grandparents and all the good things that my generation, the good times we've had there, and how many of the others have also had similar experiences there. And the youngest of my sister's grandchildren is 3 years old, so I'm hoping that she too and her siblings get used to the fact that this is a place they can go and wander around, and it's something that not everybody has, and therefore it has special responsibility because of the values, the strong emotion that come along with it.
Well, I can say, having, I don't know, they're pleasant surprises because we pretty much anticipated, we'd feel pretty good about this. And the idea of perpetuity, and I told the kids, I said, what we're doing here is, in one sense, it was estate planning, but, we've been, like I said, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and sort of the whole family. But the idea is, if, I've got 3 children, and one of them may decide to bail out and may live in Seattle and have no opportunity to come back, even though they'd like to if they live, 2 hours away. But when they're on the other side of the continent, it may just be impossible, and they may say, look, I just need to get my piece or something out of it. We have a right to subdivide somewhat, and I'd like to even reduce that, but our river corridor is totally protected. It won't ever be subdivided. But I think, there's just a pleasure in it. North of us, the river runs due north, which is not a common thing for rivers to do in the United States or Texas. And it runs into San Angelo, where it joins the other branches, and there are 5 different water courses that all meet in San Angelo and turn into the Concho River, or used to turn into the Concho River. Now they turn into the Concho River riverbed because the city has killed it. But I'm sorry, that's another issue. It is that we have a whole bunch of small holdings between us and Christoval, which is the little village where I went to school, and it's about 4.5, maybe 5 miles of riverfront or river length into Christoval. And there are a lot of places that have been small holdings since the beginning of time. I think, in other words, our place was sort of the beginning of the ranches due south of Christoval. Everything else was, people that had farms or little recreational houses, cabins, that type of thing. They'd been there since the 20s, and the farms had been there since the 1880s. And I think, we're starting, I just had a phone call and a meeting with someone who is a landowner on that stretch of the river. Was referred to me by somebody in Christoval who said, well, the Howards upstream have, they've done some kind of big conservation thing. I'm not sure what they did, but you might want to talk to him. And I drove up here to Austin to meet with this person 3 weeks ago and spent an afternoon here. So hopefully there's going to be synergism from this along that part of the river, and maybe, some watershed work, and certainly the Conservancy's interested in doing that. This is the only, if you look at the Conservancy map, there's a dot in the south end of Tom Green County. So hopefully we're going to be a catalyst, we hope, and we're going to work on this too. When I have some more time, my son's going to work on it. He's finishing law school before he's going in the Marines. He's got about 6 months before he goes on full duty, and he wants to do this. He's fascinated with it. So it's, that's a neat thing.
I think that's happening all across Texas. I've heard of different watersheds, different landowners kind of taking a private initiative and organizing themselves. I mentioned the Pedernales, but they're trying to do that in the Llano watershed as well to protect their rivers and streams in their areas. So we talked some here today about the partnership between the land trust and the landowner, and how that is, not only are you protecting your property forever, but that partnership can be forever or feel like forever. So what were some of the considerations in choosing a land trust? What would be some of your advice to landowners who are considering that, and land trust people who are in the audience, things that a landowner thinks about that in partnering with someone on their property? What would be suggestions that you might have?
I can't really shed any useful light on it because the TNC was sort of preordained as we got into this.
Well, based upon
Cassie,
your...
There's a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
From ignorance, is it, what is the lawyer's role? Is it an intermediary between the land trust and the
Well,
landowner?
I will say our experience has been when a landowner comes in to our firm, we sit them down and we ask about what their goals are for the property and what they're trying to accomplish. Sometimes it depends on where their property is located in Texas. So certain land trusts have certain service areas, for lack of a better word, or areas that they're interested in protecting. And we typically sit down and give them a choice of a couple of different land trusts. Every land trust has its own personality and
Usually the estate lawyer for the landowners, or just on this particular issue?
I'm sorry, I guess I didn't understand your question. Are we the estate lawyers?
The estate, do you handle their
It depends. Some landowners, we do their estate planning and we might do their conservation easement, but some landowners come in and they only want to do a conservation easement and they already have their estate plan in place. So it kind of depends on the situation. I wouldn't say necessarily, to get back to your original question, that we're the mediary between the land trust and the landowner. We certainly advise the landowner as to, here are your options, and sometimes we help them interview the landowner. Here are typical questions that you need to ask.
in Mr. Winkler's case, he went directly to the trust.
Actually, it sounded like the Nature Conservancy came to him
That's right.
and said,
Let me interject. In our case, they helped do the actual paperwork for the conservation easement. Okay, so
But in some cases, does the land trust do the paperwork?
in some cases that is the case. Whenever a landowner may not have a lawyer that they work with, I would never advise that. I wouldn't advise a land trust to take that on, but sometimes that's what happens. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, the function of the attorney, there's an attorney, often they're either in-house attorneys, or the land trust can have usually their attorney. The landowner will have an attorney. Often a land trust will recommend several attorneys, and because the person will say, well, okay, I'd like to talk about doing something. So they get a lawyer, and usually the form of the of the easement will be originally from the land trust, and then the attorney for the landowner and everybody goes over it and works on it, and if you can recognize it at the end, that's good. But the land trust would like to keep sort of following its prototype, so that they know generally what's in there. Number one. Number two, they're just fundamentals. They can't be changed. They've got to be, in there, those recitations for tax purposes and perpetuity purposes. So that's sort of how the relationship works, but it usually starts from the land trust. But the attorney for the landowner is the landowner's representative, and hopefully is experienced in this, because if you have an attorney that's not experienced, so some people just say, well, he's my real estate lawyer, and he or she has never really dealt with a conservation easement. It's a very esoteric part of the law. So.
Well, and I will mention something too that Rylan said. The land trust may have a template that they will use or want to use. Attorneys that work often with the land trust especially in our experience, we have our own template with the Nature Conservancy and our own template with Texas Land Conservancy. Every land trust we kind of have that we've done a lot of work with, we kind of know what they want to see, and we'll use our most recent template with them. Most attorneys do that. So, how about you, Stan? Kind of describe the process that you went through to choose your land trust. I don't know that I remember.
Well, the property is on Rocky Creek, and it's rocky. Means it's sometimes got it and sometimes it doesn't, and that goes into the little blanco, which goes into the blanco. And so that was, the GBRT was one of the two options. The Nature Conservancy, I think we did talk, but I mean, at that time, I think they were looking for larger properties or more unique situations or whatever, and been very pleased working with the GBRT, and felt like, I think that the thing that was important to us is that, once again, that forever thing. If you're going to be working in your lifetime with an organization, you want to make sure that your passion or the reason you're doing this is in line with what they're wanting to do, and to conserve that watershed for the GBRT was important to us as well. So it seemed like it was a natural based on the area that they were connected to.
Well, this process was quite an evolution that I just really liked the people that I found myself talking to, and who would give me names of other people to talk to and so on. Talked to a couple of people from Houston area land trusts that didn't extend as far as Walker County, but the first two volunteers that came down from Dallas to look at our land were retired teachers. We have teachers in our family, we respect that. And we just liked them. They were people like us. When I was wondering whether my family would go along with what seemed to some of them to be a strange idea, the fact that there were people that we felt comfortable with that were doing this, and that were willing to be patient with us, to let things evolve, to talk to us, and Tom Kelsey, I'm an attorney. One of the things was that I rashly promised my mom that, yeah, I'll work on this, Mom. Well, Tom Kelsey gave me his easement. Pretty good model. So I used that and had many conversations with Burgess and with David Bezanson. So we came up with something that was satisfactory. But I think the feeling of companionship, trust with the people we talked to was and even realizing that the people who are with organizations change over time, but still, there was that fundamental, these are people that we can work with for a very long time.
That's important. Oh, go ahead.
When you're picking a land trust, how concerned should you be that a given land trust might cease to exist? And is there a succession process or something?
Well, that's something to be concerned about. Every land trust has to have a provision that if they do cease to exist, that there's another backup organization. So that's always a possibility, I suppose, but you look for a land trust that does have a track record. And one of the things that impressed us about the land trust that became the Texas Land Conservancy was that they did have an excellent track record. And indeed, you want an organization that is experienced. If it were a newly formed land trust, I would have said, well, wait a few years and then maybe you're worthy of consideration. But I think most of the land trusts in Texas have good histories. And particularly the fact that there's this organization of land trusts. There's just lots of expertise, lots of similar experiences and different experiences that landowners can find out about and share.
How about you, Rylan?
It was interesting because in the days when I was on the board of the Nature Conservancy, they probably wouldn't have had any interest in our property because what we were looking for in those days, we being the Nature Conservancy, was a high standard of sort of almost needed and endangered species, or very much of an endangered ecology. And they're still looking for that, and we have that on our place. We're blessed to have that. But they probably wouldn't have been looking for our place. And ironically, I was really interested in an agricultural land trust because we've got a ranch and we, it's either leased or we're going to operate it one way or the other. We're going to have cattle and other livestock on it. And that's very important to us that we can continue this as an operating, producing ag operation. And so Texas didn't have an agricultural land trust, and I knew a lot about them because I made a presentation to Texas cattle raisers, and they said, we want you to tell us about ag land trusts. I didn't even know they existed. And I did some research over about 6 weeks and got to know some people over the phone and learned a great deal about their experiences. And so I was still kind of going, well, I don't know who I'm going to talk to. And I was here at a TLTC conference, now I can't remember how many years ago. And I was talking to a fellow named Gary Amon who worked with the Nature Conservancy, and I said, can you give me a recommendation? I said, we've got our place over there, and I need to find a land trust. We're ready to start on this easement process. And he said, we might be interested. He was with the Conservancy, and I said, really? And so that's how we got started with the Conservancy, and of course I knew about the organization, and so that was kind of exciting to me. And we were in that process, which is now a while ago because it's before the Ag Land Trust that I'm on the board of now was formed. And I could have made the switch. My wife's family actually went with the Texas Ag Land Trust, and I think it was a different thing. My focus was the ecology of the riparian river bottom. That's the focus. The rest of the ranch is just rocky old hills, and I want to take care of that. And it's all going to work together to create an area that's protected where wildlife can move back and forth. And so that's important. But what I was really looking at is this sort of unique ecological area. And I think the Conservancy was definitely who I wanted to go with because, among other things, they're sort of the 800-pound or the 1,000-pound gorilla. If, there are threats, which there always are, and all of you all as landowners, you're sitting in the middle of these threats. We've got them going on my north and west boundaries. So that's how, I got to the Conservancy, and but that's, these both of those are one's a national or international organization, the other one we're a statewide. But the mission of the land trust, you were talking about the Guadalupe River group that you decided to go with. It's because that mission fit your needs, and I think that's what you're looking for. So you do need to check the missions of the land trust, and the land trust needs to really make sure that they define who they are and why they're there, because all of these land trusts, so many of them fit a niche or a big niche, or maybe they fit I don't know what, but you're, as a landowner is going to be wanting to have something that fits them. And what you talked about people, the organizations like our Ag Land Trust, everybody's a landowner that's on the board. And we've got people from, we've got former president of the cattle raisers, we've got 3 former presidents of the Texas Wildlife Association, so we've got a real strong confidence factor for people that are in the ag business, and that's our focus on that one, but anyway.
All right, since we're out of time and I don't want to keep you much longer, I just wanted to open it up for questions, see if anybody in the audience had any additional questions for these landowners. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if for all of you, if you own the mineral rights on your properties and don't, have there been any issues because of that?
Did everybody hear that question? Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that because, and I'm sure you're getting ready to answer it. We own all the mineral rights on the ranch, but that doesn't solve the problem. We've got, we had 1/3 of the ranch. When we had to do 2 easements. Ultimately, my decision was, and I researched, talked to people, and I said, folks, I'm not going to be able to get this deduction because we have a lease that's held by production on 1/3 of the ranch, and it happens to be the ecological heart of the ranch, but there's nothing we can do about it. And so we've got a 1946 2-page lease, which is what people did in those days. They just signed what they call a producer's 88 form. And that means we have no control over the surface. We have no surface use agreement. We have nothing. I mean, they can cut all the trees down around the river. They can pave the river. I don't know. We hope that they're bigger people than that. And right now, things are quiet. But that's a huge issue. And a lot of people, they're talking about, do I own or not own? It's not just that. It's is it leased? Because if it's leased and held by production, it's whatever's in that lease or whatever isn't in that lease. You got it.
Does it matter if it's in like a well-producing area or not?
In a what? Oh.
Yeah,
Oh, well, there's, yeah.
just in Hayes County, nobody's building for
This has to do with perpetuity. And it's the definition of perpetuity is that if the surface is subject to being surface mined, and it gets to be a real subtle issue when you're talking about subsurface minerals and the production of those minerals. And you look at the Eagleford development or Barnett Shale and that sort of thing, there's a humongous impact that those oil fields are having. But I think what was now I've lost my train of thought.
So for
Go ahead,
landowners who
Alicia.
don't own their minerals, and if they're in counties that
Yeah.
don't have a history of
Yeah.
production, what we do is have a geologist
Get a statement.
look at that particular property, and what they give us is a mineral remoteness letter that says this is unlikely remote, and that's we hold that in order to qualify the easement. Just to kind of succinctly answer that question, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
And
but-
that's what happened in our case, being in Comal County.
Yeah, we own some of the mineral rights, not all of them. The mineral rights were divided by my grandparents among the 3 daughters, so it's kind of a confusing hodgepodge. At this time, but those minerals were not leased, thank goodness. One of the reasons I came to this conference is because there's going to be a session on oil and gas leases, and I went to one at Raleigh. So that is a huge issue. I don't know what's going to happen. I would certainly be happy if it never came to pass. But I need to find out. I need to educate myself about the issues that could arise.
If you don't get a chance to, I think that session is going to be really good. I can't remember when it is, but it's Joseph Fitzsimmons, who's an oil and gas attorney, and Kathy Howell, who works for the Nature Conservancy. I'm also interested in hearing what they have to say. The IRS requires that the impact to the property, you can still have oil and gas, but it has to be limited and localized. And so what that means and how the drilling is done.
Would her easement be disqualified
As,
retroactively?
Well, we didn't claim any tax benefits, so that issue is out.
not a problem. Yeah, you just have to craft the easement to make sure that if there is drilling on the property, that's limited and localized. But it's a very controversial issue, and we won't go into it. They will cover it in depth at that session. So, any other questions? That's a great question, by the way. Really appreciate that. Well, let's thank these guys, because